like to read from you for 1 Samuel chapter 17, verses 32 through 51. David said to Saul, "Let no one lose heart on account of this Philistine. Your servant will go and fight him." Saul replied, "You are not able to go against the Philistine and fight him. You are only a young man, and he has been a warrior all from his youth." But David said to Saul, "Your servant has been keeping his father's sheep. When a lion or bear came and carried off a sheep from the flock, I went after it, struck it, and rescued the sheep from its mouth. When it turned on me, I seized it by its hair, struck it, and killed it. Your servant has killed both the lion and the bear. This uncircumcised Philistine will be like one of them, because he has defied the armies of the living God. The Lord who rescued me from the paw of the lion and the paw of the bear will rescue me from the hand of this Philistine." Saul said to David, "Go, and the Lord will be with you." Then Saul dressed David in his own tunic. He put a coat of armor on him and a bronze helmet on his head. David fastened on his sword over the tunic and tried walking around because he was not used to them. "I cannot go in these," he said to Saul, "because I am not used to them." So he took them off. Then he took his staff in his hand, chose 5 smooth stones from the stream, put them in the pouch of his shepherd's bag, and with his sling in his hand approached the Philistine. Meanwhile, the Philistine with his shield bearer in front of him kept coming closer to David. He looked David over and saw that he was a little more than a boy, glowing with health and handsome, and he despised him. He said to David, "Am I a dog that you come at me with sticks?" And the Philistine cursed David by his gods. "Come here," he said, "and I will give your flesh to the birds and the wild animals." David said to the Philistine, "You come against me with sword and spear and javelin, but I come against you with the name of the Lord Almighty, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied. This day the Lord will deliver you into my hands, and I will strike you down and cut off your head. This very day I will give the carcass of the Philistine army to the birds and the wild animals, and the whole world will know that there is a God in Israel. All those gathered here will know that it is not by the sword or the spear that the Lord saves, for the battle is the Lord's, and he will give all of you into our hands." As the Philistine moved closer to attack him, David ran quickly toward the battle line to meet him. Reaching into his bag and taking out a stone, he slung it and struck the Philistine on the forehead. The stone sank into his forehead and fell face down on the ground. So David triumphed over the Philistine with a sling and stone. Without a sword in his hand, he struck down the Philistine and killed him. David ran over and stood over him. He took hold of the Philistine's sword and drew it. After he killed him, he cut off his head with the sword. When the Philistines saw that their hero was dead, they turned and ran. Thank you. You're welcome.
I'm always a little leery of quotes from history because nobody in the room that was there to actually hear them. One of my favorite memes on Facebook is the one that says, as Abraham Lincoln posted on his Facebook page. You know, you can credit those from history with saying most anything, whether it's true or not. But I do like one that's credited to Abraham Lincoln, that whether it's true or not, it does sound a lot like him. But it says that they brought a man to him one day to try to get the president to accept him into his cabinet, and Abraham Lincoln refused. When they asked him why he was refusing, he said, "I don't like his looks." Well, his other cabinet members said, "Well, you know, you really shouldn't hold a man's looks against him. There's nothing he can do about it." To which Abraham Lincoln said, "Any man over 40 is responsible for what his face looks like." I know that personal responsibility is not a big issue in our world today, but it probably should be. And I kind of think that Lincoln may have been onto something there. I love the story of David and Goliath, because David was one of those individuals in biblical history that took responsibility for his looks and his actions very young in life. Each and every faithful individual has the right and the privilege, but also the responsibility to decide what we're going to look like. But we also face the consequences of our decisions. Will we live by those decisions that are conceived in faith, proven in battle, result in a covenant relationship with God. David did. Look at David this morning, conceived in faith, the boy shepherd. If you remember the story of David, you know that David was not the oldest in his family. He had older brothers that were much bigger, much stronger. He was the smallest of the bunch. When Samuel went to Jesse's house to ordain David to be king, Jesse brought out all of his big, strong boys, some of them already eligible for military service. And Samuel said, nope, not that one, not that one, not that one. And he said, this isn't all of your sons. If you read it in the English translation, it misses the tense because we don't really have a tense to translate it into the English language. But it misses the tense and misses the strength of what Samuel's saying. He's not saying, is this all your sons? He says to Jesse, this isn't all your sons. Jesse says, no, there's that runt. You know, that mama's boy that sits out there and with the sheep and plays his harp all day long. You know, when you really look at the talents of David, you have to wonder sometimes when he was ordained king, just what kind of a teenager he was. But you see, the public side of what they knew about the boy shepherd was not the private side. Because while he watched the flocks, he accepted his duties. And he said to Saul, one day a bear came out of the woods, was going to eat the sheep. Now I can see this teenage boy watching these sheep, and his dad has said to him, if one of those sheep gets hurt, you best just not come home. That's the way a good Okie dad would say it anyway. Bear comes out of the woods, and David's taking it to heart that God is, through his dad, entrusted him with these sheep, and the bear comes out of the woods. He says, well, the bear's got to go. So with his hands, he killed the bear. I just have a picture in my mind of David sitting over there under a juniper tree with his harp in hand, playing Stairway to Heaven or something of that nature. He was a 70s teenager. And the bear comes out of the woods, and he sets his harp down gently, and he gets up and walks over and says, you know, Bear, it'd probably be a good idea if you'd leave. And the bear doesn't leave, and so he takes him down. Another day, a lion came out of the woods, was going to eat the sheep. He set his harp aside again. He was probably playing Sweet Home Alabama that day. And he killed the lion. All while he was but a boy watching the sheep. But he learned something. He learned and gained great confidence in God. He learned that if God could deliver him from the bear and the lion, he could deliver him from anything. This is not in my notes this morning, and probably my daughter's going to get unhappy with me for telling it, because she's probably not heard the story in years, and it might influence the teenage grandsons that are here. You remember when they used to have the little cub bears down in the carnival that you could wrestle? They outlawed that in somewhere in the late 70s and wouldn't allow it anymore. Now it was muzzled. Then the claws had been removed from the little cub, but you could get in the cage with the little cub bear, and you paid your money, and you were going to win some kind of fantastic prize if you could pin the bear. Yeah, I was one of those teenage boys that got in the cage. I don't know what possessed me to think I was stronger than a cub bear. I do remember seeing the bear and seeing the top of the cage, and that's about all I remember from the incident. I know that wrestling a bear is not an easy task. I did manage to get up, and they told me I had put on a good show, but I don't know whether that means I put up a good fight or whether I just put on a good show being tossed around by the bear. But David learned from those two experiences that whatever God called him to do, God would empower him to do. And that affected his life the rest of his life, because I think David understood as a teenage boy that he was in a covenant relationship with God because he was an Israelite. And he knew that God was going to take up the slack regardless. And so actually after his ordination by Samuel, the first time David comes on the scene is in the narrative that Ethan just read for us this morning. And that's the story of Goliath. I tell you, if you don't like the story of David and Goliath, I don't know what's wrong with you. You obviously aren't short. Because I just like I had dreams of someday being 7 foot tall. It never happened. I didn't grow after age 14. But I love that story. I guess being a teenager back in the 70s, I love the fact that he took on the local authorities and won against it. He took on his family and won against them. You know what David was doing on the battlefield? If you read the narrative, you remember, he was taking food to his brothers. You know, it's humiliating enough being left at home to take care of the sheep while the brothers go off to war. But now he has to visit the battlefield and give them their lunch. And when he gets there, the enemy of God is standing there taunting God's forces. And I can just see a kid brother walks over and says, "Why isn't anybody fighting him? He wants to fight. Somebody ought to go fight him." And they look at little brother and say, "You know, you really ought to go home. Who's watching the sheep?" He said, "Well, then I'll go fight him. If you guys aren't going to do it, I'll take care of it." So they take him to Saul. And this teenage soldier stands before the king, and the king says, "You're going to do what?" Now, how tall was Saul? Stood head and shoulders above his fellow men, we're told, in the call of Saul. So Saul is a tall man as compared. We don't know how tall he was. He obviously was shorter than Goliath, or he wouldn't have been fearful of him. But he's taller than his other soldiers, which makes him definitely taller than this teenage soldier. But this teenage soldier's been conceived in faith. And he says to Saul, "I'll go get him." Saul says, "Well, it's your funeral." And Saul goes and gets his armor. And I think this is an important point in the narrative that's oftentimes overlooked, especially for application in our lives. Saul goes and gets his armor, which is going to be, the breastplate's going to be somewhere down around David's thighs. And the helmet's going to spin on his head. And they dress him all up in it. I really think Saul was trying to humiliate David. I really think that Saul was trying to say to him, "See, here's what it takes to fight a giant, and you just haven't got it." And David looks at Saul and says, "I can't fight in this. It hasn't been tested." I like that old King James translation there. But he said it hasn't been tested. Tested? Saul's worn it in many a battle. It has kept him alive on many a day. But what David is saying is, I haven't tested it. It doesn't fit. I don't know if it'll work for me. I do know this. I've got these two hands that killed a bear and a lion. And I got this slingshot. You know what slingshots are. That's the weapon that no mother wants her boy to have. The boy can always come back and say, "But look what David did with it." And mom says, "That's what I'm afraid of. Is that you'll be out there killing the wrong giants." But David says, "I can't fight in this. It doesn't fit. But if you let me go at him in the power of the Lord, this battle's as good as over."
So David takes a few stones and his slingshot and steps out there. Now we have a grandson that's 6 now, right? Used to love to watch him tell the story of David and Goliath. He'd seen the Veggie Tale version of it. And he would just get into it 100%, but he got it confused. And he said, and with the help of God, you'll beat me up. Well, Goliath didn't think he needed the help of God. He looks at him and says, have you seen this chest full of medals I got here? I've been proven in battle. And you're going to send a boy out? Not only are you cowards, you're stupid too. Well, come on over, sonny boy, and I'll feed your bones to the birds. I don't know if you caught it. You wouldn't unless you already read the full account. Where's Goliath's sword? It's still in the scabbard. Because David pulls the sword from the scabbard before he cuts Goliath's head off. I figure his shield was probably even laying off to the side. He was so confident that he could beat David that he didn't even pull his sword. He was just going to wait till he came over there and snap his neck and throw him out there and say, next. But David said, no, you come at me with a sword. I'm coming at you with the power of God. And then he ran straight towards him. I love it. I don't have a lot of use for a coward, but I got a lot of use for guts. And that took guts. There's no indication that David even thought twice. He's running to the battle. And while he's on a dead run, he slings a stone. It hits the giant comes down. And David walks over. Where's Goliath standing, by the way? On Israel's side of the line? Or in front of the entire Philistine army? You know, we look at the Sunday school pictures, we don't get the full story. Because it looks like Goliath is standing out there in the valley by himself and David run. No, he's standing right there with the full army. When David charged Goliath, he was charging the full army of the Philistines. Do you think Israel was backing him up? You know, I'm sure some of you have been in that boat too. I've been there when everybody said, we're behind you all the way. I always say when I'm told that, well, why don't some of you move up here alongside me? Well, some of you run with me. Even his own brothers were holding back. But David charged Goliath. Goliath went down. He pulled Goliath's weapon, cut off his head, and Israel charged in. And the Philistines took to running. You think of the absurdity of that. I don't know how many Philistines were there. Whether it was 100, 1,000, 5,000. We don't know whether it was a squad, a unit, a squad, or a battalion. Or maybe a full regiment. But when they saw Goliath go down, they said, that boy's been working out. No. They said, what weapon did he say he was using? The other looked back and said, well, sir, I think he said something about the power of his God. Well, then I think it's time to retreat. And they fled. Why? David understood the covenant. David understood that God had promised to take up the slack, and thus David became proven in battle. David's life would go on to be a life that was constantly being proven in battle. He battled against God. I love to read the Psalms. Most people don't read the right Psalms. They read Psalms 23 and Psalms 18 and Psalms 8 and the Psalms that talk about wonderful blessings. And, you know, get out of those standard Psalms and read the heart of David. Read the 51st Psalm. Read the Psalms where David says, I cry out in the morning, I cry out at night, and you're not listening to me. He's not talking to Israel, he's talking to God. He struggled with God. He wrestled with God. Why? Because he had confidence that God wasn't going to abandon him. When we're sure someone's not going to abandon us, then we can have the confidence to question them. Now, David always comes back to a point and says, I cried out in the morning, I cried out at noon, I cried out tonight, and you weren't listening to me. And then he says, perhaps it's because I sinned. Maybe if I get that straightened out, you'll be by me again. Till in the 51st Psalm he says, don't take your presence from me. Don't remove your spirit from me. He was proven in his battles with God. You ever have any struggles with God? You don't have to raise your hand on this one. Especially if it's your home and I can't see your hand. You ever struggle with God? Well, I have. You ever doubted whether he was going to use you or not? Oh, it was a song, I loved it, back in the 80s, Christian song said, Lord, either move or move me, one of the two. Either move through me or get me out of the way. You ever find yourself saying the world has gone so bad, why isn't God doing something? Well, he already did something. You ever find yourself looking at the giant and wondering where God's at? You know, I think it's odd in especially the Old Testament narratives, it's odd to me that many of the patriarchs and the prophets and David and others stood up to unthinkable odds. And then the littlest problems brought them down. It was usually a woman, but we're not going to talk about that today. I often tell people I took a licking out behind the bowling alley when I was 16, swore from that time on I'd never fear another man as long as I lived, and I have not, nor will I ever. However, ladies, I'm terrified of every one of you. But I've always thought that was sound wisdom, not fear. But it was some little problems that brought David down. The little temptations. He did well on the battlefield. The crowd said Saul has slain his thousands, but David his tens of thousands. He was a masterful soldier, and nobody beat him on the battlefield. He didn't even beat himself, but when he wasn't in battle, he tended to get himself in problems. He wasn't a very good father. Why, his own son, Absalom, tried to take the throne from him. But he knew God would never abandon him. And even in the loneliest hours, he didn't abandon God. Funny, isn't it? Or peculiar? A man as human as you and I, who struggled with God, would be proclaimed by God to be a man after his own heart. Well, it's because David, when he struggled with God, came out more like God. He struggled with man as well. Saul sought to take his life. The Philistines tried to kill him. Absalom tried to kill him. But he trusted in God and prevailed. But I think the greatest battle that David ever fought was with himself. It wasn't perfect. We know of the big sin that he committed with Bathsheba, but I wonder how many times in David's life he thought to himself, I know I shouldn't be doing this. Why can't I stop myself? But he always turned back to God. You ever lost a battle with Satan? I've lost more than a few. You ever have Satan get the upper hand? Man, I've had times when he's had to hold my hands, I couldn't see my hands. You ever lose to him when you know that you shouldn't be doing something and you go ahead and do it anyway? It's like he's doing his happy dance all around you. It's in those times that you do as David did and you look at him and say, you know, you may have won this one, but I'm going to take whatever lumps are coming to me or whatever instruction God gives me, and I'll be back. And you're not going to like the next battle. Because we serve a God that doesn't abandon us, regardless. And it's because He has a covenant relationship with us. But folks, if we don't accept it in faith and we don't prove it in battle, we don't ever get in there where there's a possibility of losing everything, we'll never know the power of God. And I'm not talking about finances. In fact, I'm not impressed when someone says they lost all their finances and God gave it back. Because I know too many heathens that have done the same thing without the help of God. I'm talking about when you've lost everything. Your self-esteem, your dignity, your friends, your family. God doesn't abandon us. Therefore, we can run towards the battle, knowing that it results in the covenant relationship or the daily abiding that the apostle, or that the King David proclaimed in the 51st Psalm. 51st Psalm is David's Psalm of repentance. He says in the 10th verse, "Create in me a pure heart, O God, and renew a steadfast spirit within me. Do not cast me from your presence, or take your Holy Spirit from me. Restore to me the joy of your salvation, and grant a willing spirit to sustain me." And David goes on after that and says, "And then I will proclaim your name again and turn sinners from their way." Because of that, David was promised by God in 2 Samuel, the 7th chapter, 11th through the 16th verse. I'm going to read only the 16th verse. "Your house and your kingdom will endure forever before me. Your throne will be established forever." When you look at the genealogy of David, you find a name in there that's very familiar. The name of Jesus. Jesus was proclaimed to be the Son of David, proclaimed by the crowds, words spoken by the seekers, the name that they were looking forward to, and that eternal relationship or eternal covenant and deliverance was the Son of David. What a promise to be given. Think for just a moment about our lives. What is God offering us that we're not paying attention enough to receive? Had David gone home like his brothers wanted him to, we'd never know about the shepherd boy that slew the giant. Had David gone home and done what he was told to do, which was deliver the food and get back to the sheep, my, how history would be different. It is a truthful statement. When you give in to temptation, you will never know what it would have been like a few seconds later had you resisted. When we don't have a heart attuned to God, where we don't recognize His leading, we'll never know what it would have been like. Now, I know not everybody's alike. You know, the idea of taking on a giant on a battlefield kind of appeals to me. I told you last week that I've always been kind of concerned that if Armageddon is a real battle and I get raptured out, I'm going to be mad. Because I was a bit of a scrapper as a kid, and I kind of like to be in a fight that I can't get hurt in, and that I know I'm going to win. Especially one where blood runs by bridle deep. Now that's my kind of battle. But not everybody thinks that way. I kind of like to walk right into the middle of the mess and turn around and say, okay, boys, here I am. Now, this is the way it's going to happen. I preached in the middle of some environments that I probably shouldn't have been in the middle of. In fact, I preached in some environments that when I got in the middle of them, I turned around and I thought, why was I as brave as David? Maybe I should have slowed down in that run a little bit and I'd have seen how bad this was going to be. But once you're in the middle of it, all you better remember is that God given you the power and proclaim His word. Why? An eternal covenant. I like that. An eternal kingdom with God. 2 Chronicles 29, 10 through the 13th verse, just a portion of David's prayer as they were accepting contributions for the temple that David desperately wanted to build for God. But God didn't allow him to do so because he was a man of war and he did not want that associated with the earthly temple. But in the 10th verse, David praised the Lord in the presence of the whole assembly, saying, Praise be to you, Lord, the God of our father Israel. From everlasting to everlasting, your Lord is the greatest in the power and glory and the majesty and the splendor, for everything in the heaven and the earth is yours. Yours, Lord, is the kingdom. You are exalted as head over all. Wealth and honor come from you. You are the ruler of all things. In your hands are strength and power to exalt and give strength to God, to all. Now, our God, we give thanks and praise your holy name. There was a line from a Christian song a few years ago that's become one of my favorite lines. I don't remember any of the rest of the song. I just remember the one line. Sometimes I can actually remember the artist that sung it. But I like the line. He said, I want to get so close to Him that it's no big change on the day He calls my name. That was David. All he left behind were the problems and the struggles. For he was already walking hand in hand with God. I close with another quote from Abraham Lincoln. I saw it on his Facebook page, so I know he said it. It's reported that Abraham Lincoln, and we know it to be true, said one day, I never knew my grandfather. Don't know what he was like. He said, that really doesn't concern me. What concerns me is what his grandson's going to be like. It doesn't matter where we've come from, who we are, what our family name or tradition might be. It's what are we going to do? Are we going to trust in God, allow Him to use us mightily, resting in the covenant relationship, or are we going to settle for a whole lot less? Stand with me this morning as we sing. "'Tis so sweet to trust in Jesus."